Welcome everyone to NoDQ&A Video, the official Q&A video series of NoDQ.com. Shout out to everybody watching this, whether it's live or on demand. I very much appreciate your viewership and support. I have a lot of email questions from people, which I will get to momentarily. Also, feel free to super chat a question. If you do super chat a question, it will take priority. I will get to it right away. Last Q&A, I missed one from JJ Williams. Because of that, he is getting the first question on this episode of NoDQ&A Video. JJ had super chatted, should King of the Ring be a two-night PLE with the men's tournament on night one and then the Queen of the Ring as night two? I think that's a great idea. I have been arguing this for the longest time that the King and Queen of the Ring tournaments should be one night. That was what I really enjoyed about the original tournaments, where the winner had to compete 3 times in one show to become the King of the Ring. If you're going to do 2-night pay-per-views, I really think that's a great idea. One night for the men, one night for the women. I really feel WWE should do this for other events as well, like the Royal Rumble. SummerSlam doesn't need to be 2 nights. I think shows like the Royal Rumble should be 2 nights. Night 1 can be the men's Royal Rumble, and night 2 can be the women's Royal Rumble, or reverse it. Same thing with King of the Ring. I think they should bring it back as a premium live event. I would watch it. I would enjoy it. And it's a change of pace from the usual tournament format that we get, where it's qualify and match, one match on Raw, another match on SmackDown, and it's the same process. I really do miss the one-night tournaments. Thank you for the question, JJ Williams. Now, Ian emailed me a question. Shout out to Ian. Ian says, CM Punk was spotted at the No Kings protest in Chicago recently. With TKO being very big supporters of the current president's administration, do you see CM Punk receiving a punishment for being at that protest from TKO? No, I do not. I think CM Punk is a person who does what he wants to do. WWE knew the person CM Punk was before he returned to the company. They know what he's all about. They would not have brought him back if they really felt like they could not work together and reach a similar goal politically. If CM Punk was to be punished, also what kind of an example would that set? Then other wrestlers would not be able to express themselves without fear of being punished. It would start a domino effect, and it would be very bad for WWE. You have to consider bad publicity. Look at R-Truth. R-Truth got released. There was negative feedback, and WWE brought him back. Imagine if word got out that CM Punk was punished because he protested. That would lead to a huge backlash, and it would definitely hurt the morale in the locker room. It would not be good for business. It is not good for business. Even if CM Punk goes against what some executives in TKO believe or not believe, they're not going to punish him for that. It would be bad for business. And really, anytime something like this happens where somebody voices a political opinion or supports a group, you have to keep that in mind. Like, unless somebody is openly supporting something that's hateful and there's negative feedback about that, I don't think WWE is going to intervene. I do not think he will be in trouble for that. Gino, shout out to Gino, who's been part of the No DQ review. Gino says, will AEW ever be able to match WWE viewership? At this point, I am leaning towards no. WWE is such a powerful brand. AEW, they were getting somewhat close in 2021, 2022, but then it slipped away and they fell in popularity. Right now, it doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon, but I would never rule anything out. WCW was able to come up with a hot storyline with the NWO, and their business grew. All it really takes is one strong angle in AEW or one highly successful character, a character that catches fire. They catch lightning in a bottle, and their popularity could skyrocket. It is not impossible for that to happen. But I really do think that it will be a combination of several things. A lot of stars would have to align a certain way for that to happen. WWE would need to be falling in popularity, and AEW would need to have the right angle, the right character at the right time, and maybe they could catch up to WWE with their viewership. But it would take a lot, and it's definitely an uphill battle. It's not impossible, but I do not see it happening anytime soon. Shout out to Building Nexus, who sent in a $2 super chat. Thank you, Building Nexus. Your question goes to the top of the queue. Building Nexus says, what do you think Roman Reigns does at the next WrestleMania? That's a great question. We'll have to see if WWE stretches out the Seth Rollins storyline. Maybe they can hold off on it for a year. Seth Rollins seems like the most likely candidate because of Roman Reigns' history with Rollins. But when Rollins perhaps cashes in and wins the title, Roman Reigns might be right there. It just depends on when that's going to happen. I would like to see Roman Reigns versus The Rock, but I'm not getting my hopes up on that one. Maybe they do Roman Reigns and CM Punk one-on-one at next year's WrestleMania, but I really do feel like Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins have that history, and I would love to see them in a one-on-one match at WrestleMania. Maybe it's Jacob Fatu. Who knows? At this time, I think that there's still a lot of possibilities. We're 10 months away from WrestleMania. A lot can change between now and then. Realistically, I would say somebody like a Seth Rollins. In my own mind, fantasy booking, I'd like for it to be The Rock, and we finally get that match. Maybe Cody Rhodes. Now that I think about it, Roman Reigns versus Cody Rhodes could have their final match. You know, they had their first match, WrestleMania 39, Roman won. Then at WrestleMania 40, Cody won. And then you could do the rubber match at WrestleMania 42 in Las Vegas. Thank you for the question, Building Nexus. I appreciate it. Jeremy Dorset sent in this email question, so thank you, Jeremy. Hey, Aaron, what is next for Ron Killings? Could we see him challenging for the IC or US title after his feud with John Cena? That's what I'm expecting at this point. I do not see Ron Killings becoming world champion. I think that he will maybe get a little bit of a push here for this final run. Perhaps he'll get a championship, but if he wins something, it's going to be the US title or the IC title. This might upset some people, but it would not shock me if he doesn't win anything. If WWE just pushes him for a few weeks, and once the heat dies down, they're just going to forget about him and he's going to fade off into the background. I'm calling it now. I would not be surprised if that happens. If he gets like a 3 or 4 week push and then he's back in the middle of the card and they just phase him out. They slowly phase him out, and they don't abruptly say we're done with you and then he goes on social media. I feel like they're just going to slowly phase him out so there's not the outrage this next time around. That's my gut feeling. I still think he'll be around, but I think it's a long shot that he even wins a mid-card title at this point, because you got Jacob Fatu. They're not messing with that over on Raw. Yeah, he could go to Raw and beat Dominic. That's really the only path I see to Ron Killings winning a title. He goes over to Raw and beats Dominic Mysterio. Beyond that, I think it's a long shot that he gets one of those titles. Got this question here from Calvin Bowman. Calvin says, what did you think of the King of the Ring from 1999? Not a very good show. I've talked about the Attitude Era many times on streams over the years, and I think that some pay-per-views were pretty good, others were not. King of the Ring was one of those weaker shows. You had Billy Gunn as the King of the Ring. And look, I like Billy Gunn, but that one flopped pretty hard. He got that match with The Rock, and that was it for his singles push. He was back to being in a tag team after that. And he pretty much stayed a tag team wrestler for most of his time in WWE after that. The singles push did not pan out. And then you had the Steve Austin match with Vince and Shane McMahon, and you had the whole deal with the briefcase being raised up, and they were trying to tease that somebody was behind that, and we never got any follow-up on it. It was very disappointing. It was a cheap way to have Austin lose, and then of course he wins the title back right away after that. So it's like, it didn't really mean that much. Ultimately, it meant little to nothing. And the pay-per-view itself was just not that good. King of the Ring 99 was kind of a stinker. Shout out to Hamp Connell, who sent in a $5 super chat. Hamp's question goes right to the top of the queue. So thank you again, Hamp. I appreciate it very much. Hamp says, if you had a choice of any wrestling game to be remastered for current generation consoles besides No Mercy, what would it be? Easy. Day of Reckoning or WrestleMania 19. Reason being is that Nintendo Switch 2 just came out, and they have the GameCube available on the Nintendo Switch Online, which means you can play old GameCube games. What I would like is for Nintendo to work out a deal and be able to get those games on the GameCube. That would be awesome. I would love it. Day of Reckoning was one of my all-time favorites. That would be awesome to have that on GameCube or WrestleMania 19. One of those two would be my choices. Great question there, Hamp. Thank you for that. This one comes from Big G. Thank you, Big G. Big G sent in this email question. Your thoughts on Rikishi's comments with Jey Uso losing the title and his booking. Do you think Rikishi is right or wrong since the family is doing good lately, especially Roman Reigns having the title for 4 years? Listen. We all knew what Rikishi was going to say. The minute Jey Uso lost that title, everybody's like, well, Rikishi's going to go off on a rant. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Rikishi did his podcast, and I always question wrestlers. Anytime they say something, I question it. I have my doubts that they're sincere. The reason being is that the podcast is supposed to bring in viewers. They know they're workers. Wrestlers are trained to manipulate their audience. And I think Rikishi is old school in that way. He knows if he says controversial things, people will tune into his podcast. People will talk about his podcast. People will transcribe his podcast. He will get publicity if he's controversial. Remember Eric Bischoff saying, controversy creates cash. Maybe Rikishi really is upset. I mean, after all, Jey is his son, and fathers are naturally going to be overprotective of their children. And if Jey thinks his son is being done wrong in any manner, he's going to be vocal about it. But at the same time, I could see him being exaggerated with his opinions for the sake of getting more followers. He might be sincere, but I definitely have my doubts about it. And he's just seeking attention, as Ian says, getting those podcast views. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Shout out to Jeremy Adams. This is an interesting question. Maybe the chat room can comment on this, because this one I'm not really sure how to answer. Who, in your opinion, are 3 of the fakest backstage tough guys in wrestling history? It's hard to say because I haven't been in a locker room, so I can't really say like who was not as tough as they were made out to be. I mean, you look at some of the so-called tough guys on television, and not necessarily fake or cowardly or anything, but you've had plenty of guys that come off on television like they're absolute killers, and then backstage, you know, they're the nicest guys in the world. You look at somebody like the Warlord, for instance. My dad managed the Warlord in the UWF in the early 90s. The Warlord was this, you know, really intimidating, tough guy, but backstage, he was extremely nice. Like he was one of the most down-to-earth guys you would ever run into. So there's a lot of examples. I mean, some might argue CM Punk for the fact that he's out there, he's doing all the trash talking, but then he gets his ass kicked in the UFC. He's not really that tough, and you know, that sort of thing. Some people are saying Goldberg would be one of those guys. You know, Goldberg is one of the toughest guys on camera, but backstage, you know, people don't think of him that way. So yeah, there's some examples out there. There are guys that can talk the talk, but can't really walk the walk. Several people in the chat room are bringing up Kevin Nash, and Ian brought up the incident with Chris Jericho and Goldberg. So yeah, Goldberg is probably a good choice for that category. But again, I wouldn't say the guy is not tough, because he is 6'5", whatever he is. He's jacked up. He was a football player. I wouldn't want to get into a fight with that guy. I don't know him, but he's probably tougher than people give him credit for. And I think most wrestlers have some degree of toughness to do what they do. You know, I don't think that there are too many guys that will not be able to handle themselves in a fight against an average person. Let's just put it that way. I see a comment about Jon Moxley being one of those. I mean, Jon Moxley's probably tougher than your average person, and I would say that for most wrestlers. That's an interesting question. Hard one to answer, though, so I appreciate that, Jeremy. It stumped me a little bit on that one. I'm always looking for some challenging questions. All right, let's get to this next one here. This one comes from Ian. So we were talking about CM Punk. Ian says, is CM Punk actually going to wrestle in Saudi Arabia, or is there some bait and switch swerve that WWE is going to do? I do not think there's a swerve. They've already advertised it. Once they announce it and it's official, they're not going to change it. That is bad business. If WWE advertises something and goes back on it, that's not good for the company. The only time they will change, and of course there's always cards subject to change, but the only way that would really happen would be if CM Punk got hurt or there was something that prevented one of those guys from doing the match, like a legitimate reason other than they didn't want to go. CM Punk's going. They announced the match. It's set. CM Punk is doing what he's doing, and that is in itself a controversy, but I don't think he's going to back out. There's a lot of money. Remember what CM Punk said, and it's very true. He's not there to make friends. He's there to make money. Saudi Arabia is a lot of money. He's being a team player. So is John Cena. I do not think there's any bait and switch coming. I don't think you have to worry about that one. We got this one coming up from Building Nexus. Building Nexus sent in a $2 super chat. So thank you for that, Building Nexus. Building Nexus says, do you think Sami Zayn is getting the Daniel Bryan push? He kind of got it already with the Roman Reigns storyline, but now he's in this King of the Ring. The final is in Saudi Arabia. To me, it makes sense for Sami Zayn to be in the King of the Ring final. And if he's in the final, I think there's a strong chance of him winning because you can now do Sami Zayn versus Gunther as a rematch from WrestleMania. And the fact that Sami Zayn has gone out there, they wouldn't have him say this unless there was some thought of doing this. You know, why plant something in the mind of fans if it wasn't going to happen? The fact that just a couple months ago, he said the one thing he hasn't done has become world champion. That line would not have been said if there were no plans for that whatsoever, or even a consideration. I think it may happen. I don't see him winning the WWE title, but the World Heavyweight title, I think there's a realistic possibility he gets it at some point. I don't know when, if it's going to be as soon as SummerSlam or later this year or next year. But I think before he retires, Sami Zayn will be the World Heavyweight Champion. So yes, you could say he is very much a modern day Daniel Bryan in the sense that he is the ultimate underdog. He's like a Rey Mysterio, like a Daniel Bryan, you know, more of the undersized guy, but he manages to overcome the odds. He has the heart, and the heart is what it's all about. You know, you don't have to be the biggest guy. All you need is the biggest heart, and that is definitely Sami Zayn. This one comes from Gino. Gino sent in this email question. Thank you, Gino. Gino says, what is your best experience meeting a wrestler? It would have to be RVD, Rob Van Dam, for sure. We interviewed Rob Van Dam several times for No DQ, Jeff Meacham and Talk Wrestling. He was always very easygoing, always willing to do an interview. Anytime we asked, he was down for it. He let us meet up with him. We would go to this rooftop in Santa Monica, California, and he would just sit down and chat for an hour, 2 hours. He was great. He was very accessible, friendly, down to earth. Nothing bad to say about him whatsoever. RVD was awesome. Definitely my best experience of meeting wrestlers. He was great. Nothing bad to say about him. All right, Ethan sent in this email question. Shout out to Ethan. Normally, having a lot of top talent is a good thing, but with John Cena being tied up with Cody in his retirement tour, as well as Gunther just winning back his title and seemingly having a short feud with Goldberg, do you feel like a lot of top guys aren't getting the title runs they could or should get? For instance, Drew McIntyre, he mentions LA Knight, Damian Priest, CM Punk, Randy Orton, and the likely long title run Seth Rollins will have soon. You could argue that some of these guys might have been missed opportunities for a world title run. Randy Orton doesn't need it. Randy Orton's been, 14-time champion. It would have been a feel-good moment if he won in St. Louis, but totally unnecessary. CM Punk doesn't need it at this point. Remember, Shawn Michaels, other than his 2002 win, the last 8 years of his career, he did not hold a title. He didn't need it. CM Punk falls into that category. Damian Priest, I like Damian Priest. I don't know if he's going to be world champion again. He did have his run, but I don't see him as being one of those guys that's going to be at the top where they build the company around him. He's not that guy. McIntyre had his run. He might get another title run down the line. I could see him being champion one more time. LA Knight, I don't think they're going to put the title on him. I really don't. It's just a matter of there's only so many guys that can be world champion. And Triple H definitely comes off like a booker that doesn't want too many title changes and wants the championship runs to be memorable. And thus, you don't want to change champions all the time. You want to stick with one dominant champion for a long period. That seems to be Triple H's booking pattern. I wouldn't mind things being changed up and having a few surprise title changes. I just don't think any of those names are necessarily going to have long runs as champion. Maybe Drew will at one point. Maybe LA Knight will get the world title. And, I mentioned Sami Zayn, maybe him down the line. But I don't really think that there's a problem with top guys not getting title runs. And for several of them, you don't need it. Roddy Piper never had the WWE title. And he was one of the biggest stars in the history of the company. Just saying. And not only Roddy Piper, but you had like Rick Rude, Ted DiBiase, Mr. Perfect, all great wrestlers of their era, and they were never world champion. Not everybody needs to be world champion. You can still have a great career. All right, Jeremy Dorset sent in this email question, so thank you, Jeremy. Says, hey, Aaron, if you were booking WCW back in 99 December, do you think the NWO 2000 members should have been Scott Steiner, Jeff Jarrett, and the Outsiders, or Psycho Sid, Jeff Jarrett, and the Outsiders, instead of Bret Hart, Jeff Jarrett, and the Outsiders, and watering down the group with like the Harris Twins and Scott Steiner with the women? Jeremy blames Vince Russo and mentioned the concussions of Bret Hart and Jeff Jarrett. Listen, if everything went according to plan, let's say Bret Hart never got hurt, Jeff Jarrett didn't get hurt, he got a concussion, and all that chaos happened at Sold Out, I still think the NWO would have fizzled out. By that point, it was yesterday's news. The NWO had run its course, and I really felt like it was an act of desperation to bring back the NWO. I liked the idea, like trying to make the elite group of the NWO where it was just 4 or 5 guys, but I still think it would have fizzled out. Like the NWO already played itself out. I don't think it would have mattered. I don't think that there was any scenario where it would have lasted long term, regardless of who was in it or injuries or any of that stuff. Shout out to Hamp. Hamp Connell sent in a $2 super chat. Thank you again, Hamp. I appreciate it. Hamp says, what were your first impressions of WCW Mayhem and Backstage Assault? Not much, because I barely played them. To me, they were not even in the league of the THQ games. WCW had 2 great games, the Revenge game and the World Tour game. Those games were awesome. That was THQ, but then THQ went with WWE and started doing the WWE games. THQ, they were awesome, but the other companies just didn't produce games that were as fun to play, in my opinion. And WCW Mayhem and Backstage Assault were not that good. I don't really have that many memories of them because I think I played them for 15, 20 minutes and then gave up on them. Kind of like with the AEW Fight Forever game. I just could not get into it. But yeah, the N64 games that were under the THQ banner, those were brilliant. Those were all amazing games. All right, this one comes from Calvin Bowman. Calvin sent in this email question. Shout out to Calvin. Calvin says, do you see Rusev and Gunther being a tag team anytime soon? No, because Gunther is the world heavyweight champion. He's a singles guy. I really don't see Gunther ever being a tag guy. Rusev, however, I could see that. Once creative starts to run out of ideas for him and they're like, well, what do we do with this guy now? I could see him being put into a tag team. Maybe Sheamus and Rusev could be a tag team. I think that would be a possibility, more of a possibility than Gunther. Gunther really feels like the loner type. Even when he had Imperium, he was barking the orders and he was above them. I really don't see Gunther. His character doesn't come off to me like somebody that's going to play well with others and coexist. Rusev, though, he might work with somebody. I feel like he'd be that guy that would team up with somebody for the sake of just destroying people. Maybe Rusev and Sheamus. No to Rusev and Gunther. Got this email question from Ian. Thank you, Ian. Ian says, what are the best storylines involving fathers in wrestling history? Well, do they have to be kayfabe fathers or can they be real fathers? Let me know. Chat room, help me out with this one. If we're talking kayfabe fathers, I have to think of The Undertaker and, well, not Undertaker, Paul Bearer and Kane. Paul Bearer was the storyline father of Kane. That was probably my favorite father and son storyline as far as kayfabe goes. As far as, and Ian says both, as far as real father and son, like, I really enjoyed the Dusty Rhodes and Dustin Rhodes storylines over the years. I think back to when Dustin broke in WWE and they had the father and son tag match. And then in WCW, Dustin got Dusty to come out of retirement and do the War Games match. So yeah, I would say Dustin and Dusty was a great storyline. Ric Flair and David Flair, I think it had its moments, but that was a period when WCW was going down the toilet, so I don't know about that one. All right, so here's an interesting one from Hamp. This is the video game edition of NoDQ&A video on the topic of wrestling games. Hamp Connell sent in a $2 super chat, says, did you actually like the WrestleMania 19 story mode? Are we talking about the story mode where, like, you're fighting people in the pier, like you're throwing them off the docks and that sort of thing? If so, I actually really liked that one. If you didn't like that, it was not your normal story mode for a wrestling game. Like, it was outside of the ring. And I actually liked that because it was something different. Like, they had you in a shopping mall and like one of the objectives was smash the cars. Like, it's totally different from your usual wrestling game where you just get in the ring and do matches. I actually thought it was great. I really liked the change of pace and I enjoyed doing it. And I think there was one where you had to avoid getting hit with a car. I liked those missions, the WrestleMania 19 missions. If that's what you're talking about, my memory is a little foggy. But when I think of WrestleMania 19, I think of like all those different construction areas and the harbor and all that stuff. I liked it. I was a big fan personally, but I know like it was mixed as far as reviews went, and some people did not like it. Ooh, this is an interesting one. Jeremy Adams sent in a $2 super chat. Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate it. Jeremy says, Russo storylines that made you cringe the most. Where do we begin on this one? Because I could come up with a laundry list of cringy storylines. Mike Awesome is the fat chick thriller. That was terrible. That was one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. And I was just thinking, like, how do you screw up Mike Awesome? All he needed to do was go out there and beat people up. Like the first night he came into WCW, he just beat up Kevin Nash. They should have had him just mow through the roster and be a killer. Instead, they turn him into the fat chick Thriller. What? I mean, that was one when they had Hugh Morris come out there and say his name was Hugh G. Rection. Come on now. Like, what were they thinking with that one? The Judy Bagwell and the Paul one is like the go-to answer. The Stacy Keibler pregnancy storyline was ridiculous. There were so many bad ones. The thing is, like, I've blanked out on a lot of them. What about turning Hacksaw Jim Duggan heel and making him Canadian? What? Why would they do that? That was another terrible one. How about, well, see, I got a little bit of entertainment from it, but Tank Abbott doing the 3-count stuff, I mean, it just made him a complete joke, but I guess it was mildly entertaining for what it was. There were a lot of bad ones, though. More than I can count. I mean, if every week there was something that was just ridiculous on WCW television. All right, we got another super chat here from Building Nexus. Thank you, Building Nexus, for the super chat. I appreciate it. Building Nexus says, how do you see the Judgment Day breaking up, or how do you think they break up? Well, maybe each guy gets released one by one until there's no members left. I mean, at this point, I don't even know if they're going to break up the group. We have talked about this on other streams. I think you got to have the Dominic split from Liv Morgan. I don't know if that means Dominic goes with Roxanne, or Roxanne and Finn Balor were manipulating Dominic all along, and they were using that to break up the group. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities for this. I do think it should happen within the next year. I really do feel like Judgment Day has run its course. And now that Carlito's out, you know, you're shrinking the group. I think it's time to wrap it up. But yeah, my guess is something is going to happen with Finn Balor and Dominic, and there will be like that full-blown split. And that will be the end of Judgment Day as we know it. So thank you for that, Building Nexus. I appreciate it. All right, we got one here from Gino. Shout out to Gino, who is sometimes the moderator of the No DQ review. Gino says, will Enzo Amore ever come back to WWE? I'd like to see it happen. I'm an Enzo Amore fan. He was very entertaining, but I think realistically, WWE has so many people on their roster. They're building up all this new talent. They're not going to bring him back. I don't even think they'll bring him back for a nostalgic pop, because if he comes back and gets a pop, then they're going to feel pressured to sign him. And I don't think they even want to go there. I think that they're done with him. I don't think he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. He will probably go down as more or less a footnote in WWE history, which I think sucks, because he had talent. He could entertain people. He could talk. Part of the problem with him, too, was his size. Even if he didn't rub people the wrong way and get himself into personal trouble, the problem is that he was so small that it was hard to really push him as anything more than a cruiserweight or one half of a tag team. With the Big Cass team, he could be the little guy, and Big Cass could be the guy who's in there doing all the big moves. But yeah, Enzo just kind of couldn't get himself in a position where he could move up the ladder. And I don't think they're going to bring him back. You know, they've moved on. They really have. But thank you for that, Gino. And now we'll get to Jeremy Dorsett, who sent in another email question. Thank you, Jeremy. Jeremy says, hey, Aaron, could we see the Usos challenge the New Day for the World Tag Team titles? Maybe see the roles reversed with the Usos as faces and New Day as heels. Now that Jey Uso has lost the title, I definitely see that as a strong possibility. I think it's just a matter of time before we get the Usos back together as a tag team. Once it happens, it makes natural sense for them to go after the New Day. The New Day are heels, and that would be fun to revisit that feud again. New Day versus Usos one more time at WrestleMania. I think they should start building up for that. I mean, we are 10 months away, but, it's going to be a slow process. Get the Usos back together and build them up, and then maybe they end up on Raw, and you can eventually set up a match with the New Day. That would be a great WrestleMania match, in my opinion. All right, we got another question here via email from Gino. Gino said, which do you prefer, Sunday night or Saturday premium live events or pay-per-views? I really don't have a preference because this is my job. It doesn't really matter if it's a Saturday or a Sunday. I suppose I like the Saturday ones better because there's generally less news on a Sunday. Thus, I can sleep in a little bit more, but me sleeping in is like 7:30 a.m. Eastern time. I'm usually up before that. It really doesn't matter to me. Quite frankly, I care more about the time of the events. I don't care if it's Saturday or Sunday. Hell, they could do weekday pay-per-views. I don't care. I know some people have their sports preferences or work preferences. I personally don't care. I just want earlier shows. They could do any day of the week if they start early enough and end early enough. I'm fine with that. That's what I'm all for. I really have no preference whether it's Saturday or Sunday night. All right, we got one more here from Gino. This will be the last call on any super chats. If anybody wants to super chat a question, I'll be wrapping this up pretty soon. So last chance for super chats. I'm going to read one more here from Gino. Gino said, will El Grande Americano win a singles title before Chad Gable? He might at this point, because I really do feel like WWE is doing these matches with Chad Gable purposely to build him up as the guy that never wins, while El Grande Americano is the one who is always winning. I'd like to see Chad Gable turn it around, but I don't think it's going to happen until they do the unmasking. Once El Grande is unmasked, then it's Chad Gable, and then maybe Chad Gable starts winning some matches. But yeah, of the two of them, wouldn't shock me if El Grande wins a title and then Chad Gable somehow tries to take credit for it or whatnot. But yeah, I think that El Grande will win it, get unmasked, and then it'll be Chad Gable. And then people will just move on from that. All right, we got one more super chat here from Oofman. Shout out to Oofman. I appreciate the super chat. Oofman sent in $5 and says, what subjects would you like to see for the next Dark Side of the Ring season? Man, that's a great question, and it's difficult for me to ask on the spot because my memory is a little bit foggy as to which topics they've covered and haven't covered up to this point. I'm always down for more Vince McMahon Dark Side of the Ring episodes, and I'm sure they can come up with more involving him. Antonius brought up Crash Holly. Crash Holly is a good one. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think they talked about Mike Awesome yet. If I'm wrong, let me know. But Mike Awesome, I think his story is very interesting and tragic, like a lot of them. Brawl Out, they've definitely haven't covered that yet. The CM Punk backstage brawl and just CM Punk's run with AEW in general. Ian brings up Rocky Johnson. Rocky Johnson's a good one. Apparently, they did not talk about Mike Awesome. So Mike Awesome's up there. Jeff Hardy in TNA is a good one. Maybe Jeff Hardy would be willing to even participate in it and talk about that one. I'm trying to think if there's any that are not 100% tragic, you know, like they have a lot of sad moments, but there's also a redemption storyline. I feel like sometimes with Dark Side of the Ring, the episodes are so depressing and there's no happy ending. I'd like to see stories covered where a wrestler did fall down into a dark place and managed to come back from that. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of those types of stories. Like, wrestlers tend to go downhill and never recover. But yeah, that's what I would like to see. I know it is Dark Side, but I would like a little bit of optimism with some of these episodes. All right, Hamp Connell sent in an interesting one. Remember, we're on the video game topics tonight. Hamp Connell sent in $2. Thank you, Hamp. Says, what was your favorite wrestling game on the Super Nintendo? I would say the Monday Night Raw game was probably my favorite one. I remember that was one of the first ones where you could brawl on the outside of the ring and you could hit somebody with a chair. And there was a glitch I really liked in that game where you could be choking somebody and then the other player could hit you with a chair while you're choking them. And then the guy who is being choked is being choked by nothing. It was a glitch in the game. There were quite a few glitches in it. And that was one thing I enjoyed, just trying to break the game. But yeah, that one was fun. And the Royal Rumble game from 93 was a fun one too. Just the concept of the Royal Rumble with all the guys in the ring, being able to do that was fun. I mean, the game did not age well. There's so many better games that have come out since then. But as a kid, I thought those games were really fun. And you know what? I liked the one, was it WrestleMania, the arcade game? Where like Doink the Clown had the buzzer, and then Yokozuna would transform. I'm forgetting what he did exactly, but they all had like their arcade-like moves. I just remember Doink shocking people. That one was a good one too. I liked that one. That one was fun just because of it wasn't realistic like the other ones, but I did enjoy it. All right, Building Nexus sent in a $2 super chat. Thank you for that, Building Nexus. I appreciate it. Building Nexus says, could El Grande Americano be a split personality of Chad Gable? Well, I think that's what he is. They are, one and the same, although, we're all supposed to say they're two different people. But yeah, I think that it's Chad Gable under the mask, and he's doing the gimmick, and it's kind of like Superman and Clark Kent. It's the two different personalities, and maybe when you put on the mask, it changes your mentality and all that stuff. I kind of think of it like Superman and Clark Kent, or Batman and Bruce Wayne type of deal. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the actual payoff for this storyline is. If it's just El Grande Americano gets unmasked, or maybe he intentionally takes off the mask, and he has to prove a point, so he takes off the mask and reveals himself. Like, I'm really curious to see how this storyline finally comes to an end. Hamp sent in a $2 super chat. I'm sorry to disappoint Hamp, but I never really played the Mortal Kombat games. I was not really into them for whatever reason. I liked the Street Fighter games, although I really only know Street Fighter 2 and Street Fighter 2 Turbo and the new challengers, blah, blah, blah. But I played Street Fighter. I never really played Mortal Kombat, so I don't really have too much to say on that one. Plus, it's off topic, so can't really say much about that. But thank you nonetheless for the super chat. I appreciate it. All right, we got one more here from Calvin Bowman. So Calvin wanted to know my reaction the very first time that Steve Austin gave Vince McMahon the stunner in '97. It was incredible. That era of wrestling was so exciting, and it was building. Like, we were anticipating it because Austin stunned Sergeant Slaughter. Then he stunned Jim Ross. Then he stunned Jerry Lawler. And then they were coming to Madison Square Garden. So there was already that anticipation for it. But you didn't really see too much of Vince McMahon getting attacked by people. It rarely happened, but you were waiting for it. It was building up, and it was kind of anticipated. And when they're out there, you're just waiting for it. You know, they built it up, and just the anticipation of it. And when it finally happened, Vince didn't really take it very well, the bump, but it was a great moment. And it really did put Steve Austin at a whole new level of popularity. Took him up. It rose his stock. I remember Madison Square Garden reacting to that. You know, that was an epic moment. And one could argue that month right there, the injury from SummerSlam with Owen Hart, as bad as it was, it actually worked out for Steve Austin, because I feel like he got even more over just going out there and stunning people than he did getting in the ring and having matches. You know, when he beat up all the guys, you know, Slaughter, JR, Lawler, and then Vince, that made him even more popular than he already is. And that's what really set up Austin versus McMahon, set up Austin as anti-authority, and took him to the next level. So that was a very key moment in the history of WWE. Great stuff right there. So thank you for that, Calvin. And one more here from Jeremy Dorset. He says, hey, Aaron, we all know Vince Russo did a terrible job at booking WCW and has been very critical of the Alliance and the WWE version of the NWO. Overall, what are your thoughts on his comments during that period of WWE with Vince McMahon in charge? I don't blame him for being critical of either of those segments. I was critical of those storylines. I was very critical of the invasion. I think that they really dropped the ball with that. Long story short, they didn't utilize the WCW wrestlers very well. They could have brought in some of those bigger contracted names like Bill Goldberg and Hulk Hogan. They made a lot of mistakes. In the NWO, they tried to make it like the WWE's NWO, and it didn't work out. And part of that was Scott Hall was not in a good place, and Hulk Hogan came back and was over, so they turned him babyface, and it just fizzled out. But yeah, any criticisms out there of those factions or storylines, I think are very legitimate. And if Vince, I don't know exactly what Vince Russo said, but if he was critical of them, I mean, I would probably agree with much of what he said. Though those storylines were very disappointing after all the fantasy booking and the thoughts about it when WCW was sold. I think those angles really fell flat. I mean, really, the NWO should have been part of the invasion. Somehow get them involved. There are so many things that could have been done, but Vince McMahon had to make sure everybody knew WWE was superior and the other brands were inferior, and WWE was the real top dog in wrestling. Even though he owned the brands, he could have stretched it out. WCW could have been winning for a while, and WWE could have eventually won in the end. But he didn't want to do that. He had to make it clear right away that WWE was here, WCW, ECW, NWO, they were all way down here. I think they left a lot of money on the table. So on that note, we're about in an hour here, so I will go ahead and wrap up this edition of No DQ&A video. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate the viewership and support. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. Tell a friend. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Stay tuned to No DQ for the latest wrestling news and rumors. Say yes to No DQ, and I will see you all next time.